If you love gardening but hate watching your gardening budget disappear every time you visit a garden center, then today's video could save you a surprising amount of money. Because some of the most useful things in a garden don't necessarily come from expensive gardening stores. Sometimes they're hiding in the most unexpected places, and Dollar Tree can be one of them. Welcome back to Fresh Homegrown Harvest, where we are all about practical gardening, growing more with less, and finding simple ways to make your garden more productive without spending a fortune. Today, we're going on a budget-friendly shopping adventure and looking at some of the best Dollar Tree garden finds to look for in 2026. We're talking about containers, seed starting supplies, organizers, tools, baskets, plant supports, watering accessories, and several ordinary household items that can become surprisingly useful in the garden. And here's the exciting part. You don't have to buy everything on this list. In fact, you shouldn't. The real trick is learning how to look at an inexpensive item and ask yourself, could this solve a problem in my garden? That one question can completely change the way you shop. So grab your gardening gloves because we're starting with one of the simplest and most useful categories of all, containers. One of the first things I always recommend gardeners look for is inexpensive plastic containers. Depending on the season and your local store, you may find small pots, bowls, baskets, storage containers, buckets, or other plastic products that can be repurposed for gardening. And while they may not be labeled as professional gardening equipment, many can be incredibly useful. Containers are essential for gardeners who grow herbs, flowers, vegetables, seedlings, or even fruit plants in limited spaces. Before buying one, however, check whether it has drainage or whether drainage can be added safely. Remember, a container isn't automatically a good plant pot just because it holds soil. Your plants need their roots to receive both water and oxygen. This makes inexpensive containers particularly interesting for container gardeners. If you're growing in a small backyard, patio, balcony, porch, or another limited space, you may not need a giant collection of expensive planters. A few appropriately sized containers can allow you to grow herbs, leafy greens, flowers, peppers, and other compact crops. The key is matching the container size to the plant. A tiny container might work for a small herb, but a larger vegetable plant will eventually need more room for its roots. So think about the mature size of the plant before choosing its home. Now let's move into something every gardener eventually needs: seed starting containers. If you've ever purchased specialized seed starting equipment, you already know how quickly the costs can add up. Trays, inserts, humidity domes, labels, propagation accessories, and other supplies can turn a simple packet of seeds into a surprisingly expensive project. But gardeners have been starting seeds using simple containers for generations. Dollar Tree often has inexpensive trays, small containers, plastic organizers, and other products that can potentially be adapted for this purpose. When using any container for seed starting, drainage is extremely important. Seeds need moisture to germinate, but constantly saturated growing media can create problems. If water sits around delicate young roots, seedlings can struggle. A container with drainage holes allows excess water to escape. You also want a clean growing medium and enough space for the developing roots. And remember, seed starting containers don't have to last forever. Their job is simply to give the young plant a good place to begin before it eventually moves into a larger container or into the garden. Another useful find is small trays and organizers. These can be incredibly helpful when starting multiple varieties of plants. Imagine starting several tomato varieties, different peppers, basil, lettuce, flowers, and herbs at the same time. Without labels and organization, it's surprisingly easy to forget which seedling is which. A simple tray can help you group your plants together, while labels keep the varieties identified. And that brings us to another budget gardening essential: plant labels. You might find inexpensive labels, craft sticks, markers, or other supplies that can be turned into plant markers. You don't need a fancy label system to keep track of your plants. A simple marker can tell you exactly what you planted and when. This becomes particularly valuable when you're experimenting with different varieties. If one tomato performs exceptionally well, for example, you'll want to remember which variety it was next season. You can even use labels to record additional information. Write the plant name, variety, planting date, and perhaps the location where it was grown. If you're experimenting with different growing methods, you could even note which plants were grown in containers, raised beds, or directly in the ground. Over time, these simple notes become your own personal gardening reference book. Now, here's a Dollar Tree section that gardeners sometimes overlook: storage and organization. Small storage boxes can become incredibly useful in a garden. You can use them for seed packets, plant labels, garden ties, clips, gloves, hand tools, and other small supplies. Instead of having everything scattered across a shed, garage, kitchen drawer, or shelf, you can create dedicated gardening boxes. One box could hold seed starting supplies, another could contain plant support materials, another could be used for harvesting equipment. Organization might not sound like the most exciting gardening topic, but it can make a huge difference. When you're in the middle of planting and suddenly need a marker or pair of garden scissors, the last thing you want to do is search through an entire house for it. Keeping your frequently used supplies together saves time and makes gardening more enjoyable. And speaking of organization, don't overlook plastic baskets. A simple basket can become a harvesting basket, weed collecting container, tool carrier, or general garden organizer. Imagine harvesting tomatoes, peppers, cucumbers, beans, and leafy greens. Instead of carrying everything in your hands, a lightweight basket gives you somewhere to place your harvest as you move through the garden. Baskets can also be useful for separating different crops after harvest. You could keep leafy greens separate from heavier vegetables or create one basket specifically for herbs. This can make the transition from garden to kitchen much easier. Another item worth looking for is the humble spray bottle. A spray bottle can have several gardening uses, especially when you're working with seedlings. It can help moisten the surface of seed-starting media without disturbing tiny seeds. It can also be useful for cleaning leaves or applying certain garden-safe solutions when the product instructions specifically allow that method. But there's an important rule. Never use a bottle that previously contained household cleaners or other chemicals for your plants. Ideally, purchase a new bottle specifically for gardening and label it clearly. And don't assume that misting is a substitute for normal watering. Seedlings eventually need enough water to reach their roots, and proper drainage remains essential. If you're starting seeds, you may also encounter clear plastic containers that can potentially be used for temporary humidity covers. Some seeds germinate better when the growing environment remains consistently moist. A clear cover can help reduce moisture loss during germination. However, once seedlings emerge, airflow becomes increasingly important. Don't leave young plants trapped in a humid, poorly ventilated environment indefinitely. Remove or open the cover as appropriate and make sure seedlings receive sufficient light. A humidity dome is a temporary tool, not a permanent home for your plants. Now let's talk about gardening gloves. You might find inexpensive gloves that are perfectly suitable for everyday gardening tasks. Gloves can protect your hands while you're moving soil, planting, pulling weeds, handling mulch, or working around rough materials. If you garden frequently, having several pairs can actually be convenient. You can keep one pair near the vegetable garden, another near your containers, and another in your main tool area. Just remember that inexpensive gloves may not be as durable as premium options. Check the stitching and material before buying, and replace them when they become damaged. The goal is to protect your hands while keeping your gardening comfortable. Next up are basic hand tools. Depending on your local store, you may find small trowels, cultivators, shovels, or similar tools. These can be useful for container gardening, raised beds, transplanting seedlings, loosening light soil, and other small jobs. But there's an important distinction here. A cheap hand tool can be excellent for light gardening without necessarily being suitable for heavy-duty work. If you're dealing with extremely compacted soil, rocks, roots, or large planting areas, you may want to invest in stronger equipment. Before buying an inexpensive tool, examine the handle, metal, connection point, and overall construction. Now let's move into one of my favorite budget gardening categories: household items that can be repurposed. This is where shopping gets really interesting. You might find measuring cups, bowls, colanders, trays, baskets, storage containers, and other kitchen products that can perform useful gardening jobs. A colander, for example, can be used to rinse freshly harvested vegetables. A measuring cup can help measure water or other materials when exact quantities are required. A bowl can temporarily hold seeds, harvested herbs, or garden debris. The important thing is to think about the function rather than the labels. You don't need an item to say garden on the package for it to be useful in your garden. Another surprisingly useful household item is the bucket. Never underestimate a good bucket. A bucket can carry weeds, collect vegetables, transport soil, hold tools, move compost, or help with cleanup. You could keep one specifically for harvesting and another for weeds or garden debris. If you have a large garden, you may eventually discover that you can never have too many useful buckets. Now, what about plant supports? If you grow tomatoes, cucumbers, beans, peas, flowers, or other plants that need support, keep your eyes open for twine, soft ties, clips, stakes, and craft supplies. These inexpensive items can sometimes be adapted into simple plant support systems. The key is choosing materials that won't damage your plants. Avoid tightly wrapping rigid materials around growing stems. Plants increase in size as they mature, and a tie that seems loose today could become restrictive later. Soft ties are generally better for securing stems because they can provide support without cutting into the plant. You can also use inexpensive stakes for young plants. A seedling that becomes tall and weak may benefit from temporary support. But remember that a stake doesn't solve the underlying cause of weak growth. If seedlings are extremely thin and stretched, they may need better light. Good growing conditions should always come first. Now let's talk about hanging baskets. If you're short on garden space, hanging containers can be a creative way to make use of vertical space. Depending on the container and plant, you might grow herbs, trailing flowers, or other compact plants. Hanging baskets can also add another layer to a small garden, allowing you to use space above the ground. But hanging containers can dry out quickly, especially during hot weather. The smaller the container, the faster the growing medium can lose moisture. So monitor them regularly and make sure the plant receives the appropriate amount of water without becoming constantly saturated. Another useful item to watch for is mesh or netting. Depending on what your store carries, inexpensive mesh materials may be useful for supporting climbing plants or creating physical barriers, but use them responsibly. Poorly installed netting can become a hazard for birds and other wildlife. Make sure it is secure, visible, and regularly checked. Now let's move into watering supplies. An inexpensive watering can may be one of the simplest garden purchases you make. For container plants and small gardens, a small watering can be much easier to manage than a large hose. It allows you to direct water toward the soil and control how quickly it is applied. And remember, the goal isn't simply to get the leaves wet. The roots are where water needs to reach. Watering the soil thoroughly and appropriately is generally more useful than constantly spraying the foliage. You may also find small buckets or containers that can help with watering. Just make sure anything you use is clean and suitable for the task. Now here's something many gardeners don't think about until they need it: cleaning supplies. Brushes, sponges, microfiber cloths, and similar items can be useful for cleaning pots, trays, tools, shelves, and other gardening equipment. Keeping your equipment clean is an easy habit that can help keep your gardening area organized. If you reuse containers from one growing season to another, clean them before planting again. Remove old soil and plant debris, and allow the containers to dry properly. Clean equipment is especially useful when you're moving between different plants and growing projects. Another excellent category is food storage containers and bags. Once your garden becomes productive, you suddenly discover a new problem. Where do you put all the vegetables? Harvest containers can make a huge difference. Small storage containers can help organize herbs, greens, berries, and smaller vegetables. Larger containers can hold heavier crops. The goal is to move your harvest from the garden to the kitchen without crushing delicate produce. You could even create a simple harvest system: one container for herbs, one for leafy greens, one for tomatoes and peppers, another for produce that needs to be processed quickly. This organization can make harvesting feel much less chaotic. Now let's discuss something that can save you money in the long run: seed storage. If you save seeds from your garden, organization is extremely important. Small containers or envelopes can help keep seeds separated and labeled. Always record what the seeds are and when they were collected. Seeds generally store best when kept dry, cool, and protected from conditions that can reduce their viability. A fancy seed storage system isn't necessary. What matters is keeping everything organized and protected. And here's another clever use for inexpensive storage containers: creating a garden emergency box. Put a few basic supplies inside: extra labels, garden ties, gloves, small tools, clips, and other items you frequently use. When something breaks or you need a quick replacement, you know exactly where to look. Now let's talk about measuring tools. Rulers, measuring cups, measuring spoons, and similar household items can be surprisingly useful. A ruler can help you check planting depth and spacing. Measuring tools can help you follow instructions accurately when using fertilizers or other garden products. This is particularly important with concentrated products. Never assume that adding extra fertilizer will make plants grow faster. Too much can damage plants. Follow the product label and measure carefully. And that brings us to one of the most important budget gardening lessons. Cheap doesn't always mean good value. An inexpensive product is only a bargain if it actually performs the job you bought it for. If a tool breaks immediately, the money wasn't really saved. If a container cracks quickly in the sun, you may have to replace it. If a basket cannot handle the weight of your harvest, it may become more frustrating than useful. So don't simply ask, "How cheap is it?" Ask, "How useful is it? And how long will it last?" That question can save you even more money. You should also compare prices. Sometimes Dollar Tree will have an excellent deal. Other times you may find a more durable product somewhere else for only a little more money. A tool that costs slightly more but lasts for years may be a better investment than repeatedly replacing cheap tools. This is especially true for equipment that needs to handle significant force or has a safety function. For heavy-duty tools, pruning equipment, electrical equipment, or anything that could cause injury if it fails, prioritize quality and safety over the lowest price. Another thing to remember is that inventory changes. The products available at one Dollar Tree location may be completely different from those at another. Seasonal inventory can also change quickly. Gardening supplies may appear during one part of the year and disappear later. So if you see something genuinely useful, don't assume it will still be there next week. But at the same time, don't panic buy every gardening product just because it's inexpensive. Go into the store with a plan. If you're preparing for seed starting, make a list of what you actually need. Maybe it's trays, containers, labels, markers, and a spray bottle. If you're preparing for harvest season, perhaps you need baskets, storage containers, gloves, and cleaning supplies. If you're building a container garden, focus on pots, saucers, supports, and organization. A shopping list keeps you focused and helps prevent the classic problem of spending $20 on things you didn't need because every item looked like a bargain. And there's something else I want every gardener to remember. Plants don't care how expensive your equipment is. A tomato plant doesn't know whether its container came from a luxury garden center or a discount store. A basil plant doesn't care whether your label cost a few cents or several dollars. What matters is whether the plant receives the conditions it needs. That means sufficient light, appropriate water, suitable growing media, adequate nutrients, proper spacing, and a healthy growing environment. This is why budget gardening can actually teach you more. When you don't have unlimited money to buy specialized products, you start observing your garden more carefully. You learn what works. You learn what doesn't. You figure out how quickly different containers dry out. You discover which plants need support. You learn which tools are worth investing in and which items can easily be replaced with inexpensive alternatives. And over time, you develop something much more valuable than a collection of expensive gardening products: gardening experience. Imagine saving a few dollars on seed starting containers, another few dollars on labels, another amount on baskets, storage boxes, ties, and simple tools. Each individual saving might seem small, but across an entire growing season, those savings can become significant. And that money can be redirected towards things that truly matter: quality seeds, good compost, appropriate growing media, irrigation improvements, or additional plants. That's the real power of budget gardening. You're not trying to spend as little as possible. You're trying to spend intentionally. You're finding inexpensive solutions where expensive equipment isn't necessary, while still investing in quality where durability and safety matter. And you don't need a huge backyard to benefit from this approach. Even if you only have a few containers, a small patio, balcony, porch, courtyard, or tiny garden bed, inexpensive supplies can help you make better use of your space. A few containers could give you fresh herbs. A couple of tomato plants could transform a sunny corner. A hanging basket could add another growing area. A simple storage box could keep your seeds organized. A basket could make harvesting easier. And a handful of inexpensive tools could help you maintain everything. That's what makes gardening so rewarding. You take a little space, some seeds or plants, sunlight, water, patience, and creativity, and you create something living. You don't need the most expensive greenhouse. You don't need every gadget advertised online, and you certainly don't need to spend hundreds of dollars before you're allowed to call yourself a gardener. You simply need to start. So the next time you walk into Dollar Tree, look beyond the gardening aisle. Walk through the storage section. Check the kitchen section. Look at the craft supplies. Explore the baskets and containers. Look for simple organizational products and start thinking like a gardener. That plastic basket could become your harvest basket. That storage box could become your seed organizer. That inexpensive marker could become your plant labeling system. That spray bottle could help with seed starting. That bucket could become your garden horsepower. And that simple container could become the home of your next favorite vegetable or herb. The secret is not buying everything. The secret is recognizing usefulness. Before buying anything, ask yourself 3 simple questions. Will this actually solve a problem in my garden? Is it durable enough for what I need? And can I use it safely? If the answer is yes, you may have found a genuine gardening bargain. But if the answer is no, leave it on the shelf. Because the goal of budget gardening isn't to fill your house with cheap products. The goal is to build a productive garden while making your money go further. And perhaps that is the biggest lesson from today's video. A successful garden is built more by knowledge and consistency than by money. The plants don't care about the price tag. They care about the environment you create for them. They care about sunlight. They care about water. They care about healthy roots. They care about nutrients. They care about temperature, and they care about the attention you give them. So, use your money wisely. Get creative. Reuse what you can, and invest in quality where it truly matters. If you're heading to Dollar Tree this year, keep these ideas in mind. The exact products will vary by location and season, but the principle remains the same. Look for simple items that can perform useful jobs in your garden. And don't forget to check your own home before you shop. You may already have things that can be repurposed. An unused basket, an old storage container, a measuring cup, a clean tray, a small bucket, a pair of gloves, a container that can be safely adapted for plants. Sometimes the cheapest garden supply is the one you already own. That's one of the things I love most about gardening. It encourages creativity. You start seeing possibilities everywhere. And when you learn to garden this way, you realize something important. You don't need a huge budget to grow something amazing. You need curiosity. You need patience. You need consistency. And you need the willingness to learn. So, whether you're growing your first tomato plant, expanding a vegetable garden, filling your patio with containers, or preparing for another productive season, don't be afraid to experiment with simple, inexpensive solutions. Just make sure they're safe, practical, and appropriate for the job. Because sometimes the best gardening find isn't the most expensive item in the store. Sometimes it's the little thing sitting quietly on a shelf that nobody else realized could become useful in a garden. And that is exactly why budget gardening can be so much fun. You're not simply shopping, you're solving problems, you're experimenting, you're learning, and ultimately, you're creating a garden. So, now I want to hear from you. What is the best gardening item you have ever found at Dollar Tree or another discount store? Was it a container, a tool, a basket, a storage box, a garden support, Or maybe something that wasn't even marketed for gardening but turned out to be incredibly useful? Drop your answer in the comments because your discovery could give another gardener a great idea. And if you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to Fresh Homegrown Harvest for more practical gardening tips, budget-friendly ideas, growing guides, harvesting advice, and creative ways to get more from the garden without spending more than you need to. Share this video with another gardener who loves finding smart bargains. And remember, you don't need an expensive garden to grow something valuable. You need a good plan, healthy plants, and a little creativity. So, keep your eyes open, keep experimenting, and never underestimate the power of a simple solution. From all of us here at Fresh Homegrown Harvest, thanks for watching. Keep planting, keep learning, keep growing, and most importantly, keep harvesting. We'll see you in the next one. Cito.